In Western folklore, the supernatural often resides in isolation. The stories lead us to lonely Gothic castles, foggy moors, or forgotten ghost towns. The terror is beautifully rooted in distance, in the quiet, empty spaces far away from the safety of human civilization. But on the Indian subcontinent, the supernatural operates on an entirely different axis. Here, the terror is not found in isolation, it is found in proximity. To understand Indian folklore, you must first understand the sheer scale of the land. This is not just a country, it is a collision of worlds. It is a landmass holding over 1 billion breathing souls, speaking hundreds of different languages, and wearing the histories of 1,000 different dynasties in the vibrant folds of their clothing. If you travel across this subcontinent, everything changes every few hundred miles. The dialects completely transform. The garments shift from the heavy woolen ferns of the freezing northern valleys to the light, breathable cotton silk of the tropical coasts. The food evolves from the rich, slow-cooked, spice-heavy curries of the plains to the sharp, coconut-infused stews of the deep south. And just as the languages, the food, and the colors change with the terrain, so do the shadows. In India, the living and the dead do not occupy separate spheres. They share the same roads, they drink from the same rivers, they sleep in the same houses. The folklore here is not a collection of campfire stories meant to scare you in the dark. It is a survival manual. It is a set of ancient protocols designed to keep the living from stepping on the toes of the unseen. Because this subcontinent is so vast, its spiritual geography is deeply fractured. To truly map this landscape of dread, we must divide our journey. We will eventually travel to the south, where ancient Dravidian sorcery and temple curses are older than the Latin language. We will venture east into the tidal swamps where blood goddesses demand their due, and we will cross the western deserts where wandering spirits lose their minds in the heat and the salt. But tonight, we begin our descent in the north. We begin in the shadow of the Himalayas, and we follow the great rivers down in the dust. North India is a land of severe extremes. At its crown, you have the Himalayas, the most towering, unforgiving peaks on earth. The air is thin, the pine forests are ancient, and the isolation can shatter a man's sanity. But as you move south, the mountains flatten out into the vast, fertile plains of Punjab, Haryana, and Uttar Pradesh. This is the agricultural heartland. Endless fields of sugarcane, ancient trade routes, and the decaying remnants of British colonial estates and Mughal forts. In places like Saharanpur, where the dense sugarcane fields meet the crumbling brick of centuries-old ruins, the atmosphere grows incredibly heavy as soon as the sun sets. It is in these specific environments where human civilization is built directly on top of ancient, bloody histories that the folklore takes root. In the north, the supernatural entities are categorized with forensic precision. They are defined by the trauma of their death and the specific hunger they carry into the afterlife. There are the bhoot, tethered to the physical location of their sudden demise, the pret, who roam the earth driven by the insatiable physical appetites they harbored in life. But the apex predator of the North Indian night, the entity that requires the most elaborate defensive rituals, is the Churel. If you walk through a rural northern village, you might notice small iron nails driven into the wooden thresholds of certain homes, or perhaps a black thread tied tightly around the wrist of a young man. These are not decorations, they are barricades. The Churel is born from a specific cosmic tragedy. She is a woman who died during childbirth or during pregnancy. Traditional framework, she has died at the exact threshold of bringing forth life, her biological and spiritual purpose violently interrupted. Because of this profound injustice, her spirit does not cross over. It curdles into pure, calculating wrath. When a Churel manifests, she is often described as stunningly beautiful, cloaked in bridal finery, but the folklore provides a chilling physical tell, a biological glitch in her manifestation. Her feet are turned completely backward. Her heels face forward, her toes point behind her. It is a grotesque, physical representation of her state of being. She is a creature trapped in the past, unable to walk forward into the next world. Unlike the Western vampire, the Churel does not drink blood. She drains vitality, and she does not attack strangers. She returns to her own family, specifically targeting the male members whom the folk tradition implicitly blames for her suffering. A man targeted by a Churel simply begins to wither. His skin pales, he loses his mind, and he slowly wastes away, dragged across the same threshold she is trapped upon. The rituals to prevent her return are intensely practical. When a pregnant woman dies, mustard seeds are scattered along the dirt path from her home to the cremation ground. The belief is that the Churel has an obsessive compulsive need to count. She must stop and count every single mustard seed on her way back to the village. By the time she finishes, dawn breaks, and the sunlight forces us back into the unseen world. Small iron nails are driven into her heels before cremation, physically pinning her spirit to the earth. These practices may sound brutal, but they are the coping mechanisms of a society living in constant proximity to death. By giving the tragedy a name, a set of rules, and a physical defense, the community finds a way to survive the crushing grief. Let us leave the plains for a moment and travel upward in the high-altitude forests of the Himalayas. Here, the terror changes shape. The entity known as the Pichal Peri, which also translates to the backward-footed one, shares a physical trait with the Churel, but her domain is the absolute wilderness. The stories of the Pichal Peri belong to the loggers, the shepherds, and the border soldiers. The encounter is almost always solitary. A man walking alone through the dense pines at dusk hears the sound of a woman weeping, or perhaps humming a local folk song. He follows the sound and finds a woman sitting on a rock, her face hidden. As he approaches, the ambient noise of the forest simply turns off. The wind stops, the birds go silent. When she turns around, her face is beautiful, but when he looks down, he sees the backward feet. The Pichal Peri does not immediately attack. She watches the realization dawn on her victim, and then she begins to pursue him. Because of her anatomy, her movement is a terrifying, jerky, reverse articulation that defies human joints. Yet, she moves with blinding speed. Survival depends entirely on local knowledge. The men who survive know not to run in a straight line because her backward feet make it difficult for her to navigate sharp, sudden turns. She is the supernatural embodiment of the mountains themselves, breathtaking from a distance, but fundamentally alien and entirely lethal if you underestimate them. As we move away from the high mountains and descend back into the northern plains, the landscape becomes littered with the bones of empires. North India is a graveyard of architecture. You will find centuries-old Mughal stepwells, known as Baulis, hidden right in the middle of bustling modern markets. You will see the decaying, ivy-choked mansion of the British Raj slowly sinking back into the earth. There are places where the stones have soaked up hundreds of years of human abomination, betrayal, and bloodshed. And in these abandoned, crumbling places, you do not find the ghosts of humans. You find something much older and much fouler. You find the Khabees. To understand the Khabees, you have to realize that it is not the spirit of a deceased person. It is a lower level entity, a parasitic consciousness tied to decay, rot, and the stagnant energy of forgotten places. The horror of the Khabees is profoundly sensory. It rarely manifests as a shape you can see with your eyes. Instead, it announces itself through the air itself. Imagine walking through an abandoned colonial estate. The air is dry and dusty, but as you step into a particular room, the temperature suddenly drops by 10 degrees. The air becomes heavy, almost gelatinous, and then the smell hits you. It is the sudden, overpowering, suffocating stench of rotting meat. There is no carcass. There is no physical source. It is the atmospheric signature of the Khabees. This entity is highly territorial. If a human unwisely chooses to sleep in a place claimed by a Khabees, the entity does not attack with claws or teeth. It attacks the mind and the breath. In modern clinical terms, we might call the experience sleep paralysis, but the folk tradition of the North gives it a much more terrifying anatomy. Victims awake in the dead of night, their minds perfectly conscious, but their bodies entirely paralyzed. And then they feel the weight. A massive, invisible, crushing pressure settles onto their chest. They cannot speak. They cannot scream. They can only lie there in the pitch black, feeling the icy air, smelling the rot, and sensing a heavy, rhythmic breathing directly against their face. The Khabees feeds on this absolute claustrophobic terror. But, as with all things in this ecosystem, there are defenses. The folk remedies for the Khabees are as sensory as the entity itself. The burning of loban, a strong, thick frankincense, is used to cleanse the air of its foul presence. Ancient verses are recited, not as prayers, but as sonic boundaries. The Khabees reminds us that in India, an empty room is never truly empty. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the supernatural will always claim the spaces we leave behind. The folklore of northern India is not a single, isolated religion. It is a tapestry woven together by centuries of trade, migration, and conquest. And perhaps the most fascinating thread in this tapestry is the deep integration of Islamic mysticism into the broader Indian folk consciousness. Here, we must speak of the Djinn. For a Western audience, the word genie often conjures up images of a wish-granting servant in a brass lamp, a harmless caricature from old Hollywood movies. Erase that image from your mind completely. In the North Indian reality, Djinn are an entire parallel species. According to the ancient texts, while humans were created from clay, the Djinn were forged from smokeless fire. They are neither inherently good nor inherently evil. They possess free will, exactly like humans. They have their own families. They have their own religions, their own courts of law, their own kings, and their own wars. They live alongside us, occupying a dimension layered directly over ours. They reside in old trees, near bodies of water, and upon the rooftops of crowded cities. Because we share the same physical geography, interactions are inevitable, and they are governed by a strict, unspoken bureaucracy. There is a place in Delhi called Firozshah Kotla. It is a ruined 14th century fortress right in the heart of the modern, chaotic capital. Every Thursday, thousands of living, breathing people travel to these ruins. They do not go as tourists, but rather as petitioners. They bring photocopied letters, passports, and legal documents, and they press them into the cracks of the stone walls. They are writing to the Djinn. They bring disputes about stolen land, abusive spouses, and unsolved crimes. They seek justice in the court of the smokeless fire, begging the unseen entities to intervene where human courts have failed. But coexistence with the Jinn is a razor's edge. Most cases of Jinn possession in India are not demonic takeovers. They are punitive. They are the result of an accidental offense. A human might throw a pot of boiling water onto the bare earth without saying a warning word, unintentionally burning a sleeping Jinn. A woman might let her hair down while standing under a specific tree at twilight, inadvertently attracting the gaze of a powerful, unseen entity. The resulting possession is a form of supernatural retaliation. The entity binds itself to the human, changing their voice, their strength, and their personality. To remove a Jinn, you do not use holy water. You negotiate. It is a terrifying, high-stakes diplomatic exchange between the human healer and a creature of fire, mediated in the dark. And who mediates these negotiations? Who stands between the vulnerable living and the predatory dead? In the West, you might call a priest or an exorcist. In North India, you call the Tantrik or the Ojha. These are the specialists, the shamans of the North. In a landscape teeming with Churels, Pichal Peris, Khabees, and wrathful Djinns, the Tantrik is a figure of both deep respect and profound fear. They are not entirely of the light. To fight the darkness, they must know how to navigate it. The practice of black magic, known locally as Jadoo Tona, is not a myth or a relic of the past. It is a very real, very active economy that still dictates the rhythms of rural life. It is used to cure illness, to break curses, to ruin rivals, and to bind wandering spirits. The rituals of the Tantrik are not meant for the faint of heart. They operate on the fringes of society, often performing in their most powerful work in the dead of night, in the Shamshan, which is the cremation grounds. Imagine a riverbed at 2 a.m. The air is thick with the smell of burning wood and scorched flesh. The Tantrik sits cross-legged among the still warm ashes of the dead. According to the lore, the cremation ground is the epicenter of supernatural activity, the threshold where spirits linger before passing on. To protect themselves from being consumed by the very entities they are trying to command, practitioners will sometimes smear their bodies with the white ash of human remains. They do this to mask their living scent. To the entities of the dark, the Tantrik becomes invisible, a dead thing walking among the dead. They use lemons, cloves, raw turmeric, and iron, objects believed to hold intense grounding properties, to absorb malignant energy. They capture wandering spirits in glass bottles, burying them upside down at the roots of ancient banyan trees, so the spirit loses its sense of direction and cannot return. But this power comes at a terrible cost. The relationship between a Tantrik and the unseen world is purely transactional. If a practitioner binds a spirit to do their bidding, they owe a debt to the dark. And in the folklore of the North, the dark always comes to collect. As we conclude our journey through the North, a clear picture begins to form. The horror of Indian folklore does not stem from a battle between good and evil. It is not about righteous humans conquering a demonic threat. It is about understanding your place in a food chain that extends beyond the visible spectrum. It is about respect. It is about acknowledging that humanity is just one tenant in a very, very crowded house. The rituals, the iron nails, the mustard seeds, the letters pressed into ancient stone, these are not superstitions of the ignorant. They are the accumulated wisdom of thousands of years of survival. They are the protocols of coexistence. They teach us that the membrane of reality is terrifyingly thin. And so, we must leave the North for now, but remember the rules we have discussed. If you ever find yourself walking down a quiet, dusty road in the northern plains as the twilight fades and the birds suddenly go dead silent, and if you hear the sudden, sharp chime of a woman's silver anklet directly behind you, do not run, do not speak, and above all else, do not look back. Just keep walking, because in the north, the road is never truly empty. Thank you for joining me on this